Though Queen Soraya infamously divorced the Shah of Iran in 1958, their twisted love story had an even darker end. The pair never stopped loving each other, but they were more star-crossed than Romeo and Juliet. Years after the split, the Shah was on his deathbed when Soraya sent him a letter. It ended in a more horrific tragedy than either could have imagined. Soraya was groomed for a royal destiny from the very start. The only daughter of Iranian nobleman Khalil Esfandiari and his wife, the German aristocrat Eva Karl, Soraya grew up in luxury and spent her adolescence shuttling between Berlin and Isfahan while attending the best finishing schools. Despite that, she had a notoriously blunt demeanor and bad temper and could snap quickly when someone annoyed her. But she was pretty. In fact, she was so pretty that in 1948, the Queen Mother of Iran, who was on the lookout to get her son, Shah Mohammad Reza, a new wife, decided she was queen material by simply seeing a single photo of her. Ah, what a fairy tale. But like all fairy tales, it was a little creepy too. The Queen Mother was so into Soraya that she sent over one of her daughters to see what the girl was made of. The Iranian royal family didn't mess around. Soraya might have barely graduated from long division, but they invited her to their palace in Tehran all the same. On the surface, it was a little casual meet and greet to see how everyone got along, but in reality, they were formally auditioning Soraya as queen. She was swept away by her promised fairy tale, and it all happened in just one instant. The second that the Shah walked into the room, he wore his crisp-pressed military uniform, and the sight had Soraya love-struck. She described him as magnificent. Aflutter with young love, Soraya wasn't at all ready for what came next. If she was googly-eyed over the Shah, the feeling was more than mutual. He was completely obsessed and was ready to propose there and then. But his red flags were there from the beginning. For one, Mohammed was firmly in his 30s and over a decade older. Secondly, her new in-laws were notoriously dysfunctional. In an effort to make him more manly, the Shah's father didn't show him much love, and his mother was smothering and jealous. But that wasn't even the worst part. Mohammad Reza had also been married before. His first wife was the equally beautiful Princess Fawzia of Egypt, and their union ended in horror and infamy. Fawzia had been unsurprisingly miserable in the toxic family dynamic. Together they'd had one daughter, not a son as they'd hoped. During his first marriage, he was an absolutely rampant cheater, and his private life was littered with heaps of glamorous mistresses and clandestine trysts in luxury cars. Bad idea or not, Soraya said yes to the Shah's proposal. To this day, there's some confusion about just how old she actually was on her wedding day. Some people believe the palace lied and said she was 18 when she was really 16. The wedding was set for the fast-approaching date of December 27, 1950, until a horrific event occurred. Soraya fell violently ill with typhoid on the very eve of her wedding. As a result, the palace had no choice but to delay the nuptials. Yet when he heard about his fiancée's illness, the Shah responded with a surprising gesture. Though he was disappointed to delay the royal ceremony, he actually pulled out all the stops for his delirious, bedridden bride. It's said that he came to Soraya's bed every day for the entirety of her sickness just to place a jewel on her pillow. For all his kind understanding in pillow jewels, the Shah and his family really wanted to get this wedding moving, so much so that they reset the date to just 6 weeks later. Was it a case of being so in love he couldn't wait? Or did the Shah just really want a male heir, ASAP? In any case, it was much too soon, and Soraya paid a high price. Soraya, who was still pretty much a child, don't forget, was nowhere near well enough to walk to the altar when the time came. On the morning of her wedding, she was so weak that she could barely stand. Did this stop the Shah? No. Today, Queen Soraya's wedding dress is an iconic part of fashion history. Designed by Christian Dior, the silver lame gown was a pearl-studded confection trimmed with marabou feathers. Yet what most people don't know is that Soraya's chills were so intense she had to wear a wool vest and socks under her finery to stop her from shaking. The lavish dress weighed an astonishing 66 pounds, and the ailing and underdeveloped bride nearly collapsed under its weight. It got so bad that even the Shah had to take notice. Minutes before they walked down the aisle, he cut off the dress's train just to make sure his queen could make it through the ceremony. But they did, and they were desperately in love with each other. But then Soraya's dark side came out. When she was in a good mood, no one could be sweeter or more charming. But if you crossed her, you better watch your back. After the couple bickered one evening at a public dinner, she stunned the guests by picking up a priceless vase and smashing it against a wall. After yet another fight, she banned the Shah from their marriage bed for weeks on end, forcing him to sleep outside her door on a cot. These events sent tongues wagging, but it's likely no one even knew about their biggest issue. Soraya definitely brought out the Shah's fiery side, as their many fights attest to, but even her youthful anger couldn't change the Shah's reserved ways. Heartbreakingly, thanks to his love-starved childhood, Mohammad was often stiff and shy, even in private and even with his wife. With all the pressure and dysfunction, Soraya began to rebel. Today, Queen Soraya's beauty and elegance have made her an icon, but that doesn't mean she was a good queen. In fact, for all that she was in love with the Shah, there wasn't much else about being the ruler of Iran that she liked. Soon enough, she disdained royal customs, often refused to wear formal clothes, and shirked her boring duties. Unsurprisingly, this backfired on her. The Shah might have thought the world of his new wife, but pretty soon his court had different ideas. They were already suspicious of her European heritage, so her royal tantrums and less than stellar devotion to the throne earned her the scornful nickname, "that German woman," and they sure didn't like what they saw next. In the 1950s, Queen Soraya was embroiled in yet another scandal, this time on an international scale. Visiting friends in America, she water-skied in Miami while wearing a revealing bikini. It was an absolute catastrophe at the conservative palace, and the photo was even banned in Iran. This may have been the point that the family started plotting against her. The Shah's first wife had already had very icy relations with her in-laws, so it was no surprise when Soraya didn't warm to them either. But their cruelty toward her was unprecedented. They were straight up awful and began to get jealous of the Shah's devotion to his wife. But Soraya had her own jealousy issues, and they were about to get out of control. Although Mohammed didn't have his coveted male heir yet, he did have his daughter Princess Shahnaz from his previous marriage. With her in-laws constantly accusing her of stealing the Shah's love, Soraya went and made the exact same accusation to Princess Shahnaz, who, by the way, was only 8 years younger than her. She hated whenever the girl was around and felt she took too much of her husband's attention. But this disdain for Shahnaz may have come from a fear about her own ability to have children. After all, one of her main duties as queen was to give the Shah an heir, and yet 3 years had passed without a pregnancy. With a sense of dread, the Shah asked Soraya to travel to America for a top-notch medical checkup. Incredibly, the initial news was good. Doctors in New York claimed that the stress of the past few years had made it difficult for her to get pregnant, but there was nothing to worry about when it came to fertility. Tragically, however, this wasn't to be the last word. The couple still had a bad feeling that just wouldn't go away, so they traveled to Boston for a second opinion. The results were heartbreaking. Their worst fears were confirmed. Soraya was indeed infertile and could never give birth to an heir. It was earth-shattering news. The royal marriage already had its difficulties, but Soraya's fertility issues made things nearly impossible. By 1954, the couple were heading for a breakdown. Their fights got louder and longer as they tried to figure out a way out of their predicament, but that October, they went one step closer to ruin. In the autumn of 1954, tragedy struck. The Shah's brother, Prince Ali, perished in a plane crash at the age of only 32. It was now never more important for the royal family to have a male heir to succeed the Shah. Desperate, Soraya began one of the most harrowing periods of her life. Ever since she had received her infertility diagnosis, Soraya had undergone a battery of tests and treatments to try to get pregnant. After Prince Ali's plane crash, she submitted to even more, but nothing seemed to work. During this trying time, Soraya got no support from her in-laws. In fact, they were downright vicious. Still jealous of Soraya's status, the Queen Mother and the royal princesses actively spread gossip around the court about her and her barren womb. Nonetheless, Soraya had one more hope left, even if it did come from a bizarre place. Soraya had never gotten along with her stepdaughter, Princess Shahnaz, but she soon found herself desperate for the girl's help. You see, Shahnaz had just gotten married to Ardashir Zahidi, the well-heeled son of a former prime minister, and if she could give birth to a male grandson for the Shah, maybe this whole nightmare would just go away. Unfortunately, the Shah despised his daughter's choice of groom, and this led him to make a damning pronouncement. Mohammad Reza swore that Zahedi could not continue the dynasty and that he would never accept a grandson from the union as heir. The royal couple was back at square one, but the Shah did have another scandalous idea. Once Mohammad Reza realized that Soraya would likely never bear him children, he proposed taking a second wife. Now, this wasn't uncommon in the Iranian royal family, and in fact, the Shah's own father had several wives in his day. Still, Soraya was modern enough to feel deeply insulted by the idea, and she outright refused. From then on, the Shah began to drift away from his queen in an echo of his father's coldness. To cope with all the stress, Mohammad Reza's old womanizing ways began to return. The Shah took up a series of glamorous mistresses to blow off steam, and he was far from discreet about it. These women had names like Pat and Daisy, names that Queen Soraya would have known very well. Soraya, who was already under an enormous amount of stress, was absolutely livid at the rumors of his infidelity, and she started to lash out. This marked the end of their fairy tale. Soraya couldn't take the constant pressure anymore, and while visiting Rome in 1958, she sought out her closest confidant and let loose. In a tearful heart-to-heart, she told her friend that she was thinking of divorcing her husband. The Shah's next actions were unspeakable. After hearing his wife's heartbreaking confession, the Shah gave Soraya an ultimatum. Either she accept a second wife, or he would annul their marriage. She gave him his answer. On March 14, 1958, the divorce became final, and Soraya was officially exiled from Iran forever. The divorce was disastrous. The public loved Soraya, and they weren't happy to see her go. In fact, one of the first women who was shortlisted as her replacement had to turn the Shah down because she was afraid the people might try to off her. Despite these troubles, the exiled queen herself was at least putting on a brave face. Soraya once said that it was a relief to no longer have to try to fulfill an impossible task, and that she was happy to just be a normal woman for once. Deep down, however, she was more than devastated. The public may have assumed Soraya had hated her life in Iran, but that was far from the truth. She loved her home and felt like it was her true calling to be the Shah's queen. In a cruel twist, the first man Soraya met who gave her comfort after her separation was Italian film director Franco Indovina. After Soraya went through the very public divorce with her husband, she met Franco in a private moment. Franco was a charming director who had worked with none other than Federico Fellini, and they fell passionately in love within weeks. Despite this, Soraya never quite forgot her husband, and tragedy was just around the corner. In the early 70s, Franco Indovina lost his life in an unexpected plane crash. Devastated, the former queen gave up men for good and refused to marry ever again. Though Soraya moved on and eventually lived in Paris, she never quite stopped thinking of the Shah. But he had his own dramas to contend with. 1 year after divorcing Soraya, Mohammad Reza married Farah Diba, who soon gave him the male heir he always wanted. Still, he never forgot Soraya, and he kept a single memento of her in his office, a photo of the pair standing together happily before all the heartbreak. And then came the end for both of them. As the years went on, Soraya kept in touch with her ex-husband through letters. Despite all their difficulties, they still held an abiding love for each other. In 1980, Soraya heard that Mohammad Reza was gravely ill and only getting worse. When she found out he had passed on, of course she was utterly shattered. In the end, Soraya didn't live much longer without the love of her life. She passed on in her apartment in Paris in 2001, alone and childless. The last words of her biography read, "Maybe my fault was that I loved him too much." In the wake of Soraya's death, her story, once a sensational piece of royal gossip, took on a more poignant tone. The tragic romance between Soraya and the Shah was revisited with a new sense of melancholy and reflection. Their relationship, marked by intense love, personal struggles, and insurmountable obstacles resonated deeply with many who saw in it the timeless themes of love, loss, and the quest for personal identity. Soraya's life after her exile had been a complex tapestry of public appearances and private grief. She had occasionally returned to the public eye, not least through her brief foray into the film industry. In the 1960s, Soraya starred in a few films, including Three Faces of a Woman, but her acting career never truly took off. Despite her beauty and charisma, the shadow of her past as a queen seemed to follow her everywhere, making it difficult for her to establish a new identity independent of her former royal life. The tragedy of Soraya's infertility, a central pillar in the collapse of her marriage to the Shah, remained a deeply personal sorrow. Though she sought solace in various ways, including her relationship with Franco Indovina, she never had children, a fact that weighed heavily on her. Her letters to the Shah, filled with a mixture of lingering affection and wistful longing, painted a picture of a woman who, despite everything, could not sever the emotional ties to her past. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, for his part, faced his own series of challenges after Soraya's departure. His marriage to Farah Diba brought a measure of stability in the long-desired male heirs, but his reign was increasingly besieged by political turmoil. The 1979 Iranian Revolution ultimately forced him into exile, mirroring Soraya's own fate years earlier. His final years were marked by illness and a sense of displacement, compounded by the knowledge that his once glorious reign had ended in upheaval and loss. The intertwined fates of Soraya and the Shah were emblematic of a broader narrative about the nature of power, the constraints of tradition, and the enduring human spirit. Their love story, fraught with obstacles both personal and political, continued to captivate the imagination of those who learned of it. In the end, their legacy was not just one of royal grandeur and public spectacle, but also of profound human vulnerability and the universal search for meaning and connection. Soraya's final years in Paris, though solitary, were not without their moments of quiet reflection. She lived a life of relative seclusion, surrounded by memories of her past, yet she remained a figure of fascination and sympathy. Her death in 2001 marked the end of an era, but it also cemented her place in history as a symbol of the complexities and contradictions inherent in the life of a royal. Even after her passing, Soraya's story continued to inspire books, documentaries, and retrospectives, each attempting to unravel the enigmatic life of the woman who had once been the Queen of Iran. Her legacy, intertwined with that of the Shah, served as a poignant reminder of the enduring power of love, the pain of unfulfilled dreams, and the indomitable strength of the human heart. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories and historical insights. We love hearing from you, so let us know in the comments. What aspect of Soraya's story resonated most with you? Do you think her life would have been different if she had remained queen? And who is your favorite historical figure with a similar story? Your thoughts and engagement mean a lot to us.